Hi, and welcome to The Journey. I'm Michael, your host. Today, we're going to be talking about home cooked food for your dog. What is it? How do we do it? Can we do it? Do we have to buy it? Well, I've got Nikki here today. She's a vet tech and she's down here in San Diego, and she's all about the nutritional side of feeding your dog. So we're going to be breaking it down today with Nikki. Thank you for joining us and welcome. I'm so excited to have Nikki. I would love for Nikki to say hello to the room and just kind of introduce herself, what I haven't done. Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks. Thank you for the actual wonderful introduction. So yeah, my name is Nikki and I am a registered veterinary technician. I live here in Southern California and I like to talk about dog food. So I've been cooking for my dogs for I guess over 5 years now. I always kind of round it down, I guess, but for about 5 years. And my story kind of started with my dog Ash. When he was younger, he had horrible GI problems. And honestly, I feel like what most pet parents do. And, you go online and you try to find the best 5-star rated dog food. And, I tried to feed the best thing that I thought. And he basically took me through this journey of realizing how much I didn't know when it comes to dog food. And I learned a lot. And I basically eventually got him onto a home cooked diet with the assistance of a board certified veterinary nutritionist. And I was really, really lucky. I happened to go to a conference. Whenever there was a boarded nutritionist doing talks, I'd always go. And one of the talks happened to be about nutrition. And he was just really, really helpful after the talk, talking about maybe what compositions to try for him and stuff like that. And basically, I've been cooking for Ash ever since. And then as I financially could afford it, I moved Ranger onto home cooked food as well, because we do know it is more expensive. Like, I know a lot of people say that it's the same cost, but I don't know what magical suppliers they have because I've never been able to make it the same cost as Kibble. It's definitely an investment for your dog if you're going to do it. But for Ash, it really was life-changing for him because he went from a dog that was having chronic GI signs, so vomiting and diarrhea and regurgitation, to, having a normal, healthy life and really thriving. So for me, I think that there's something behind fresh food. I've looked through all the research, and I know that there are some known benefits, but there's still a lot of benefits where we can say, like, that's anecdotal at this time, but maybe in the future we will, do more research and see how, either if those benefits exist and then how significant they are as well. So that's kind of my background and my story of getting to fresh food. It's been a longer journey. I think it took us a year to even get to the point where we're feeding a fresh food diet, but we're here now and we've kind of been navigating it ever since.
And I love that, and it's like, I think it's so important because when people start to look at what they are feeding their dogs, and like, once again, like you perfectly said it. And I say this all the time, is like, we don't know what we don't know. And it wasn't until, and Ryan, of course, it wasn't until I met Ryan and I started really breaking down Kibble and what's in Kibble and how it's processed and the nutritional value of Kibble. And you meant people feel like it is an investment, it is more money. And yeah, it can be. But I think in the long run, where is money spent? Is it in their health in the beginning of their life, throughout their life, by feeding them a really beautiful diet with nutritional value? Or is it at the end of their life in their golden years where maybe they do say, 60 or 70% of dogs do get cancer towards the end of their life. And to me, when I heard this, it was so alarming to me. So I love that Ash actually took you on this path of being able to pivot and give him a better holistic, maybe nutritional value in his meals to help GI issues and his diarrhea and his imbalance inside of his system. I told everybody in the room, I mentioned, is like, you have done such a beautiful job on your Instagram where you've just broken down different meals and you show different meals. So we always talk about baby steps in the room. So I would love for you, let's kind of backtrack a little bit back to Ash when you were taking him off Kibble and you started doing the fresh food. What were your first baby steps? So that, because we always say the first step is just today, just start with a baby step today. So where did you start with your first baby steps?
So I will say with Ash, there wasn't baby steps. So with Ash, it was more of we were trying to find something that worked. So like we tried over-the-counter diets, then he was on prescription diets. And I think as far as diets go, the prescription diets did work much better than the manufactured diets did. Like there was a significant improvement on that, but he was still having issues once a month, which is why I was still looking at more options and why I went towards fresh food as that option. And then he was basically resolved since then, since doing the full transition. But like I didn't add in a little bit. Like I literally like did the 2-week transition with him and then he was on fresh food. I feel like Ranger is more of the example, say like someone has a typical healthy dog and you're like, oh, well, is fresh food going to be a good option for me or not? Or like, how do I add that in? And I feel like Ranger is my better option of baby steps. So like when I put Ash onto fresh food, I honestly could not afford putting Ranger on fresh food. I was a new grad. I was not making a lot of money. I could barely scrap together enough to put Ash on fresh food. I really couldn't afford it for Ranger. So for Ranger, the things that I did that I felt like started to kind of balance that scale a little bit is, adding a little bit of fresh fruits and vegetables. So like if I was eating, say, carrots and, blueberries for that week, Ranger would get a little bit of that in his bowl too. So just a little bit of fruits and veggies added into bowl. If we were having some watermelon, seedless watermelon, Ranger would get some seedless watermelon. Honestly, Ash would sometimes get those items too, but sometimes not because he had such severe dietary restrictions, even on a homemade diet. I think if I gave him other foods for like that first probably 9 months, he would flare still. But the longest he stayed on the diet, he was fine. Now he can kind of eat almost whatever, as long as the diet is still a majority. So he can have normal treats for the most part, whereas before he couldn't. So like there was more dysbiosis or something like that going on then. But for Ranger, he could always kind of eat anything and not have issues. So I made baby steps of adding in fruits and vegetables to his diet. And then I slowly started to just take out portions of his diet. So for example, I would make Ash's meal, like his batch for the week, and I might make an extra like meal worth and then split that for Ranger for all week long. So he was getting another additional complete and balanced diet that was fresh food, just a little bit added into the bowl every week. So it would just be, maybe 25% of the bowl that was fresh food rather than the entire thing. And then you just kind of go up as you can or can't afford it. For me, I always just felt bad looking at both of their bowls. And even though I couldn't scientifically tell myself changing Ranger's food would, cure him of a disease or help him for XYZ. I don't have any research to back that up. I still felt like there were some benefits that might be there, maybe with better bioavailability of antioxidants or nutrients or things like that. So I wanted to try to get him there, but it took me a long time to afford the ability to give him all fresh food. So it was a slow practice, and it just, adding on a little bit each time. Sometimes I'd pick up a manufactured fresh food diet. It kind of depended on what I was going through.
I know that probably Norel as well. And, I was speaking with her and how she started in the human side of food. And all of a sudden she started looking at one of her dogs, kind of like what you're doing with both of your dogs. You're talking about one was necessary. One was something going on. So you switched diet until you found something that was working. But Norel was talking about this, and I was going to, I'd love to see what your opinion is about this. For you and your dogs, what your experience was, she was, once again in health nutrition for humans. And then she started looking at her dogs, and she had this one dog that was just kind of mopey around, do. And she's like, wow, why am I so involved with the human side of food? And I really haven't been really involved with the pet side of food, and I'm feeding them kibble, and maybe I should make a change. And she made a change, and she laughs today about it because her and Glenn say one day they had a dog that was kind of moping around the house, sluggish and all that. And they said 2 weeks later, after they had switched his diet, it was a completely different dog. He had a completely different personality. He was bouncing all over the place. He had all this energy. Did you even notice that with Ash and then Ranger as well? Or did it just just because you introduced it so slowly, you didn't really notice a big difference?
So I think with Ash, he was so ill before that I feel like there was an obvious significant difference between the two. So obviously he was more energetic. He was already super energetic though, but he was off the wall crazy once he was feeling better too. He's always been that crazy dog. With Ranger, I wouldn't say so. Because I transitioned my dog so young, I feel like I didn't see that stark difference some people will transition their dogs later in life and say their dogs will have really bad arthritis, or there's other like inflammatory conditions going on just because of aging. And then they transition their dogs. And I've heard like anecdotes of people like saying like, yeah, I've noticed they have a lot more energy now. I mean, we don't have, like I say, whenever I kind of present this information, like I don't have any scientific evidence of anything like this. Like there's no like cross-reference reference studies on like looking at activity level with changing to a fresh food diet. But like on a theoretical basis, there might be, since there's increased digestibility with a lot of these fresh food diets, you have more nutrients available. Maybe it helps with, the skin turnover and the muscle turnover a little bit more than maybe a Kibble diet does. So theoretically, like that jump of saying like, hey, the dog maybe has more energy, it's possible in the sense of it could be, due to food. It could be just composition. Our fresh food diets tend to have a little bit different of a composition than our Kibble diets do. So there's a lot of different factors to kind of consider that could be contributing to it. At the same time, but I know that I have heard with older dogs, sometimes they will see a little bit more of an activity when they go into a fresh food diet. Like there's more of a significance. With younger dogs, I feel like they're already so spunky, you don't notice as much.
I'd like to go back to this question too that I asked, because I know for me, after listening to people like you, listen to Ryan, to Narelle and all that I started looking at my own personal diet. Even Dr. Katie, she's a holistic vet in Colorado. I started looking at my diet going, oh my God, what am I feeding myself? What am my partner? What is my husband and I? What are we eating? And we've made a drastic change in our food just by being in Clubhouse and listening to the dog world and the dog food and pesticides and all that. Has this impacted you and your family in the way you guys eat as well?
Well, I will say that before kids, I feel like I had more of an impact on what we were eating just because technically, so how I food prep is I meal prep for my dogs and myself all together. So I do like it as a little package, and whatever's extra from my dog's meal prep, I just kind of throw it into whatever food that we're having for the week. I know it probably sounds weird, but it works out that way just fine. So, if my dog Ranger is having, lean ground beef and there's extra from his, I'm just going to throw it into like a casserole or a stir fry that we're going to be eating later in the week, just so that I don't have that much freezer space. I only have like a small freezer, with a fridge combo for, 4 adults and then now 2 toddlers. So that's how I used to do meal prep when it was just us. I find that having kids makes things a lot more chaotic. With meal prep, mainly because I have 2 picky toddlers. I see it's just a stage of life, right? So I tend to actually save the dog's food separate, and then we're eating different meals because my kids now, the only way I can get them to eat like a balanced meal is almost like giving them a casserole. So it's just because our lifestyle has changed a little bit to how that kind of works, and we're busier now with having kids and stuff. So I think there is kind of like transition periods, but I do find that one, you're not going to home prepare meals for your dog, like just in general, unless you enjoy doing it. You may choose a gently cooked diet or a fresh food diet for your dog, cook for yourself, however. But if you're doing it for your dog, most likely you're going to be doing it for yourself too, just because you're going to have to enjoy it. And if you enjoy it, you're going to do it for both. At least that's my experience. I will say sometimes with raw, because there's no cooking involved, it's a little bit more disconnected sometimes. So sometimes I'll see people because they just put it down, right? Rather than having to cook it, that, they have, this is the dog's food and my food is different. So, but I think there's like a common thing of my dog eats better than me. Like I've heard that from somewhere before, and it can happen a lot in the fresh food world too.
You definitely got me chuckling when you're like prepping your food and your dog food and, whatever's left over your family gets. I'm like, that. So I just find that so endearing. Angie, hello, Angie's good to see you. Do you have a question, or is there something you'd like to share with us?
I was kind of giggling when she said, like, people that meal prep for their dogs will often meal prep for themselves. So I am like the worst person. So like, when I was working like with the thoroughbred industry, like all of the diets were like very carefully tailored for like optimum nutrition. And like, even with my dogs, like I am crazy to the point where I even raise my own stock for my raw diet. I don't buy hardly anything from the store, maybe produce, but the meat I raise all myself. And then I will go to McDonald's.
Oh no, you're kidding me. That's, and that's kind of the crazy thing. I have to say it's horrible because it's like everything that I've learned in these rooms about nutrition for animals and the food that's out there and Kibble. And this is my personal opinion, everybody in the room. I just want to say this. This is my personal opinion, but it's kind of like I've concluded in my mind, and I don't know if it's a fantasy or where, it places in my life, but I kind of feel like Kibble is kind of like McDonald's for dogs. And so, but I don't know what it is, Angie. Every once in a while, I get that craving for quarter pounder with cheese, and I just can't help myself. And I'm like, wait a second, this is Kibble. I can't be eating this. And then so it's like, I get that. And then, you have the luxury because where you live is that you get to like raise your livestock. You get to even grow your own food and all that. Nikki, some people, one of the things I hear all the time, because you mentioned it with your refrigerator storage, some people feel sometimes when they are cooking and they are meal prepping for their week or whatever for their animal, that's a big issue that people like come against. Like, oh my God, where am I going to store all this food? What's been your magic? Have you found a solution for that? Or that's something that you maybe not necessarily struggle with, but you contend with every week?
So there's a couple of things. So with my dogs, I know that I can fit a maximum, like if my freezer is empty, a maximum of about 2 weeks worth of food. Like that's because I have two 50-pound dogs and they eat, a little over a pound of food a day, and they have the containers and everything like that. I can jerry rig it so that about 2 weeks at a maximum can fit in my fridge. Now, I will give a short story to this of, if you do have, say, something that happens or that's coming up and you do need more freezer space and you don't have the space to buy like a chest freezer. So I know a lot of people in apartments, you don't have a garage. I would employ friends and family. So when I know this sounds weird, but when I was pregnant, I wanted to continue to fresh feed my dogs. But I knew I got terrible morning sickness. And about probably 4 months in, I literally could not stand the smell or texture of meat. And it was just ridiculous. So what I did is I basically just toughed it out for about a week and made 9 months worth of dog food. Now, I would never recommend someone that did this amount of dog food at one period of time. I vacuum sealed it. And what I did is I went and found friends and family that had chest freezers and stored all of that food so that I could feed my dogs while I was pregnant with my twins, and then after they were born for several months on fresh food diet while I knew I couldn't cook. It's possible to do that. If you do have friends and family that have extra space, you can use their freezer space for like a one-time gig like that. Obviously, the grandparents didn't care because they were getting grandchildren out of this entire situation. But I've done that before where I really, really needed extra freezer space and I just didn't have it. I actually employed friends and family to get that freezer space so I could do this basically massive batch. And I don't know if I have pictures. I'd have to look, but I literally used swimming pools to mix up batches, like kids swimming pools to mix up batches of that dog food. It was absolutely insane. But for like the day-to-day thing, most people get a chest freezer if they have like a giant breed dog or multiple dogs and they don't want to be prepping all the time. I usually do weekly preps though, because that gives me maximum freezer space now that I have my toddlers and they have those little frozen things they eat all the time, like the frozen like veggie snacks and stuff. They're all in there. So need a little bit more space now.
I love that. I know so many people that they have houses and they have freezers and half of them are usually empty because they don't use them as much as like you're using them for them. And I love the whole kiddie pool mixture thing. I love that. Your goal is to make 2 weeks ahead in advance. How much time does that take you to prep that food?
Oh, I only do 1 week at a time now just because I have really limited time. So if I go start to end, it usually takes me about 45 minutes to meal prep for my dogs. So a little under an hour. Mainly the limiting factor is that I'll take that time. So usually about, I would say 30 minutes of that is cooking everything. And then everything has to cool. Because so with raw feeders, you don't have to worry about the cook-cool process. But if you're cooking food, you do actually have to have your food completely cooled down before you're adding in any of your oils or your vitamin and mineral supplements, because they'll actually degrade with heat. So for me, what I have to do is like cook my meat, and then I put it on, I have cookie trays, cook my meat, put it on the cookie trays, and then I have like a rack system in my freezer to cool everything down in my freezer. And then I come back to like my meat and my organs and my carbohydrates and any veggies that I have to cook, like all the things that had to be cooked, come back to those in like 30 minutes or so, 45 minutes. And then I take them all out. They'll be they won't be frozen yet, but they're going to be nice and cool, or at least to room temperature. And then I can go measure everything out for my food prep. So I'll spend about 30 minutes of the time cooking. Then there'll be like a break, and then I'll spend another 15 minutes of time mixing it all together with weighing everything out. So I will say though, depending on the recipe that you're using, if you're doing like, I have this one recipe I used to do for Ranger that I hated, and I actually redid it because I just did not like cooking it at all. It was a grain-free fish recipe, and the fish you have to, I had a really small, again, I guess smaller kitchen area, the small oven, and I don't have a double oven, so the amount of fish that went into that recipe for its allergies, I had to rotate everything through this oven, and it would take hours to rotate all that fish through the oven. It just sucked. So I actually redid that recipe because I didn't want as much fish content in it, so I wouldn't have to use my oven as much because it was just annoying. So it kind of depends on the recipe too. If you have like a lot of baked items and you're restricted on space for baked items, you might take longer to cook something. And I've heard of some people where they have multiple dogs will actually rent out like a commercial kitchen once a month.
I love that. And you've touched on this a little bit, a couple of times, you know, when you're saying the fish too, I'm like, not only the cooking time, I'm like, what about the smell of all that fish? You know, I'm like, your process. I mean, you've learned so much, and I could see that in your Instagram, and I could see that in your words and your mission that you share here in Clubhouse. We hear this all the time, raw versus cooked. And some people think, you know, raw is better than cook, or cook's better than raw. For me, it's kind of like, I feel like it's really neither nor. Why did you go to cook versus raw?
Honestly, because of pathogen concerns. For me, being in the city, sourcing meat from like a grocery store, my meats are going to be dirty. Like I don't want to like say it any. There's no nice way to say it, right? Like there's limits on meats in the grocery store. 25% of chicken that you purchase can have salmonella. Listeria can be on there too. You can have E. coli. Like there's a certain amount of pathogens allowed on grocery store meat because they assume that you're going to cook it. So for me, with the supply that's available locally, I really don't feel comfortable with purchasing it. Now that I have toddlers, it's even more so. It's just the pathogen concern makes me really worried with looking at those different things. And I feel, at least for me, I feel like most of the benefits of fresh foods you can see from both. So I'd rather go with the one that has less of a pathogen concern for our situation. Now, I think it's kind of an individual basis on making that choice. Like obviously, if you have better sources of meat where they're not going to be contaminated with those things, then maybe raw might be a better option for you. If you don't have either young children or someone that's compromised or things like that, maybe raw is a better option in those cases too. So I do think it depends on your situation and how comfortable you are. There is that ick factor of raw, and I've never been able to really get over it. And maybe with more experiences I would, but pathogens is my main reason of not going towards raw, especially since I would want to DIY it in the meat that's close to me. But like I said, there's other things to consider as well, and I think that I can see a lot of the same benefits with cooked. But that's just my breakdown and opinion on it,
No, and I totally respect that, and I get it. It's dirty, and even just for us, and a lot of humans talk about this. We don't know what we don't know, and we think we're going to the grocery store, and we think we're protected from going there and buying our foods, especially if we're going to a higher-end grocery store, and it's not necessarily true because it's not about necessarily the grocery store sometimes. It's about where the meat's coming from. Nikki, when we're talking about meat, we're talking about proteins and all that. Let's talk about proteins a little bit. When you're cooking, how do you balance out when you're cooking how much protein versus vegetables and grains? How do you find that balance?
So there's a lot of different ways to do it. I use Balanceit.com because it's what I learned on. So it was a software created by a board certified veterinary nutritionist, and it allows you to basically pick from, they select certain like proteins and stuff like that they have good nutritional data on, and you can pick from those things and create a recipe. For my dogs, as far as composition, I actually go to my medical knowledge for them. So for example, for Ash, he has gastrointestinal problems where he has issues with fat. So his diet is actually higher protein, low fat, and then moderate carbohydrate. My dog Ranger has arthritis. He has hip dysplasia, and he has allergies. So for him, he's actually on a high protein, high fat, low carb diet. So each of my dogs is on a different composition of diet. And then depending on the composition that I want will depend on what proteins I choose and what ratio of those things I'm going to do in comparison to like carbs and fruits and vegetables and stuff like that. So basically there's minimums that you'll want to meet. Most of the recipes that I do, I try by weight to have about 50% animal protein. And then I kind of trickle off on the other things or adjust on the rest of it. But that's just like my basis for doing my recipes. It doesn't necessarily mean that all dogs are going to fall into that category. I just find that your amino acids will be met with using a lean protein at 50% by weight better by if you go underneath that. Sometimes you'll have some amino acids that are necessarily missing or not met when you don't get to that 50% by weight mark. And even that, sometimes you'll need multiple protein sources in order to meet all your amino acid needs. So there is like some finickiness, and that's why I like Balanceit, because it gives me that information so I can adjust the recipe, or it'll tell me that something doesn't work. Like if you choose the wrong oil, or say a protein's going to have a problem, it's going to give you like a red bar saying like, hey, this isn't a good option for you. You need to try again. So it's kind of like formulating with training wheels, if that makes sense. So that's what I use.
No, and I love that. And is that something that like everybody can use? Can they go to balanceit.com and just use it themselves? Is that a simple?
Yeah. So Balanceit.com, they can use it as the easy formulator. So basically how it works, and I can pull it up on my computer, you have a protein, a carb, a fat, a vegetable, and a fruit column. There's also a search column as well. And then on the bottom, it's going to say create dog recipe or create cat recipe. So if people do have kitties, you can make a cat recipe too. Either one is fine. And you have to select at least one item from the protein column, but everything, and then you have to select at least one type of fat if your protein doesn't have enough essential fatty acids in it in order to really make a recipe. And then you can search for things like liver or organ meats or like liver, kidney, spleen, stuff like that can be searched for, but it's not in the little boxes. I will say that when you do use the generator, it's going to give you options like high protein, moderate protein, and then cost effective, which is usually high carbohydrate. So when you look at that, I do find that when you choose the high protein, sometimes the fat amount is a ridiculous amount, or you'll go and look at the recipe and like it has like unrealistic amounts of certain ingredients for like a normal consumer, in the sense that it might have like 12 bell peppers in it because you didn't put enough carbohydrate in it to give it fiber. So it decided it was going to use bell peppers as a fiber source, which I really wouldn't recommend. That's a little excessive. So it does have some things where when you look at a recipe, sometimes it'll come out weird and you'll need to actually edit it. And at the bottom, there's a little thing and it says advanced options, and you can click that and actually edit the individual amounts of those things to make it so that it's more user friendly as far as amounts. You're not going to end up with like 5/8 of a teaspoon of something, or anything odd, so that when you measure it out, it's not going to be hard to do. You can also adjust to your dog's weight to make it easy to prep for just individual meals, and then adjust it to weekly batches, so you can just do batches of food and then divide it by 7. There's a lot of different options, but it does take a learning curve. I will say that is that sometimes when people use it to start out with, they get really overwhelmed because the recipes don't look right, or their dog doesn't do well on it because they picked a high protein and they're like, oh, my dog has loose stool. And I'm like, well, that recipe has like 60% fat. That's probably why your dog's not doing well on it. Let's adjust this a little bit. So there is a learning curve with it, but anyone is accessible and can use that to formulate a recipe.
Well, and I think that's just within life in general. There's always a learning curve for everything. And then we all get a little frustrated when we start something new and we're like, oh my God, I can't get a hold of this. I can't understand this. And it's like, I know with me, with all the technology that I have in my studio, at first, when I first got the mixing board, the mics and all that, I was like going, oh my God, I was tangled in wires like a bowl of spaghetti. And I thought for sure I was going to lose it. But slowly I was able to untangle myself. And I think that's with, this program, but because I am looking at the Balanceit.com nutritional.com as well. And it looks very, user friendly in the sense of like, if you are beginning to start cooking at home, this could be a wonderful tool to get used to in the beginning, because just as you're getting used to cooking and understanding cooking, you can get used to the platform at the same time, and they'll probably go hand in hand as you grow with your knowledge. So, I love everything that we're talking about, and I love that, what you're talking about and how you've walked into this with your animals. The one thing I want to talk about really quick and do with diet and deal with our dogs and cats and all that is like, I know that there's these body condition scores that you can download on the internet as well. And, one's like at a score of 9 and one's got a score of 1 to 5. So when you're feeding your dogs, do you kind of look at those scores, or you probably know them by heart by now, and can you see when your dogs are getting a little heavier or a little too thin and you adjust your diet?
Yeah. So usually with something like a body condition score, so yeah, there are 2 charts. There's a 5, and a 9. They're just different ways. I personally like the 9 because I feel like it gives you more half values for dogs that are maybe slightly over. But when you're assessing your own dog, I think the really good touchstone is when you go into your vet office, ask your vet if they're at an ideal weight, and then kind of internalize what that looks like. You could even take a picture if you want. And if you're going to take a picture, what you're going to do is have your dog stand and look forward, and then you're going to come from above to take the picture. And that's going to show you what your dog's ideal waist should look like. And then you're going to come from the side with, again, your dog looking forward. So you're just coming parallel to them from the side, and you can take another picture, and their stomach should tuck up into their spine. And when you touch them or pet them along their ribs, you should be able to feel the ribs, but not necessarily see their ribs. There is an exception in the sense of you do have a highly athletic dog. A lot of the times, if you have a very, very lean athletic dog, you will see some of their ribs. Or if, say, you have like a whippet or something like that, you may see a little bit of rib definition. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And I would use your vet for a touch basis. Like if you notice a little bit of ribs and you're concerned, I would ask your vet about it to see if they are also concerned about it, or if you just have a really lean muscular dog, because that kind of does happen a little bit with our super athletic dogs. But that's the basic of a body condition score. And with my dogs, I kind of know Ranger's ideal calories per day is around 900 to 950. That's just what he does well on. Ash is actually a little higher. He has a higher metabolism. It's closer to a little bit above 1,000. So I know what their generals are for like daily activity. And I also know that, say, if we go on a really long hike or if we're going camping and I know there's going to be a lot of movement, most likely they're going to need more food. As far as, I think there is one point, so when we did first get have my kids, they did gain a little bit of weight, and I think that was mainly due to reduced activity. So if you do, you're feeding your dogs regularly, and then you notice their waistline's coming a little bit out, or they look a little bit heftier than before, and I feel like when it's minor, it literally feels like they just look a little heftier. It's not like they lose their waist. It's just not quite as distinct as it was before. And in that case, we just decreased the calories a little bit for a small period of time because we caught it so soon. And then it came back to normal.
And the reason why I bring this up, everyone, in our room today is the fact that a lot of people don't understand how important this is for your dog that you have in your family, is that their weight is so crucial to their health, because every extra pound that they have on their body actually creates more shear force on their joints, and it can cause later issues in their life with arthritis and joint issues and all that. And so, because like we talked about this in Food for Thought one day, it was like for people who are feeding kibble, when you look at the packages on the pictures on the packages, the dogs are really robust and really heavy. And then when you look at the feeding schedule on those bags, sometimes they're like, 2 scoops for this many pounds or 4 scoops or something like that. And you're actually feeding your dog maybe potentially way too much. Especially with kibble, you have to look at the digestibility account inside of kibble and what the digestibility is really all about. But it's really important that you do have your animals at their premium weight, because it doesn't just necessarily affect them every day, as you're going along, but it affects them in their future of their life. So that's why I brought this up. Nikki was talking about there's two charts. There's one through 5 and there's 1 through 9. I always look at the 1 through 9 as well, because it's just like, it gives you that extra little couple spaces to see where they are. Angie, I'm going to ask you really quick, talking about these body weights and all that, because I know you do with your dogs and your training and all that, hunting dogs and all that. How do you, because they probably go through so many calories when they're out hunting, don't they?
I'm not sure the actual calorie amount, but yes, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, because I could just imagine how much you probably have to feed them more often than the average pet, because they are burning all that energy off when they're hunting.
Yeah, so like during hunting season, I have German short-haired pointers, and then I also have my Dutch Shepherd, and the actual hunting dogs will eat approximately 6 times the amount of food as my pet dog, my Dutch Shepherd.
Yeah, and Nikki, you mentioned like you had your kids in the very beginning. You did notice your dogs had gotten a little heavier. How old are your kids now?
They're 2.
They're 2.
Still pretty young.
So,
Yeah.
but do they run your dogs around, and do they, help with the exercise now?
So yes and no. So I actually talked to some trainers about it, because my kids thought it, so since my kids like to chase my dogs, which I really didn't want to happen. So instead we play games where both of them chase individually, so that we don't have, so my dog Ash likes to be chased, but my dog Ranger has arthritis. So I don't want my kids to generalize that chasing dogs is a good idea, because Ranger definitely doesn't want to be chased. So instead we play games with Ash where he like hunts for eggs in the backyard. So the kids like hide the eggs and he'll go find them. And then we also do like this little like game where we have bases, and then like the dog runs to the base and back, and then my kids run to the base and back. So ways where they're exercising together, but we're not necessarily chasing each other. Just because I also do have herding breeds, so I don't want to I don't want Ash to nip my kids on the heels to herd them, because when he was younger, we had a neighbor who had a toddler that was about my kid's age at 2, and he definitely did try to herd them in the backyard one time. So we're trying to avoid those situations, if that makes sense right now. I think when the kids are a little bit older, it'll be easier, because he's 50 pounds. So he's still like he's about twice their size. So he gets too excited, he might knock them over too.
Oh, I'm just picturing it in my mind, and it seems adorable, but it can be dangerous, and I get that. I want to jump to another question I have for you. Is we've talked about proteins, we've talked about balance of the foods, like going to Balanceit.com and looking at vegetable, fruits, and oils, and all that, the carbohydrates and proteins. What about, and this is one of the things I think is so important for people to know, what about the foods that they're supposed to avoid, that they want to avoid, that are unhealthy or dangerous for animals that people may not even realize?
So it's funny, because a lot of people are worried about the things that, you need to avoid, but there's not really actually that many things that are toxic for dogs, like in the sense of things that, like as far as meat products go, like there's not many meat products that are going to cause your dog to be ill, unless you choose like a super like high fat meat and your dog's not used to that kind of composition. Your dog's probably going to be fine on almost any type of meat. Now, I will say that there is a digestibility standpoint of choosing for a homemade diet. Certain types of meats are more digestible than others, and certain types of organ meats are more bioavailable as far as mineral content than others. So when we're choosing meats for a homemade diet, it's more of choosing the ones that we have data for digestibility in dogs, and not trying to go too far out in left field to choose foods for our dogs that maybe or may not be highly digestible for them. So using more known factors than unknown factors. As far as things that are toxic, like, and even these going to be dose dependent. Things like onions and garlic are toxic. Certain types of mushrooms are toxic, but like the ones that you eat, like shiitakes or button mushrooms or portobellos, those are all actually fine. There's certain types of nuts that are more prone to mold that are toxic, and then there's also hazelnuts that are toxic. Obviously, chocolate is toxic, and then grapes, raisins, and currants are toxic. There's also, I think leeks are related to onions, so those would be like a no-go within a diet. But for like when we think about actually food for our dogs, it's actually very vast. like most things they can actually eat and in moderation. It's just a matter of when we're creating a diet, the digestibility of the individual fresh ingredient and its purpose to how much it's going to be composed of the diet and why we're choosing it. So when we're doing a homemade diet, it's more intensive, but if you're just giving treats, like most stuff that you probably have in your fridge, your dog can eat without an issue.
And the other thing to touch on too is because learning what I've learned from Ryan and in the food for thought from all you guys from nutritional value for dogs and their diets. What about, one of the big things I hear all the time is calcium. Where do you add the calcium into your diets? Because that's really important for dogs, especially in their younger years, right?
Yeah, so with the Balanceit program, when you create the food, it actually has a supplement that it recommends. So you have two different options. One is to use their Balanceit like multivitamin supplement. It was created by the same program. They have a couple of different ones depending on if you're managing like kidney disease or liver disease, or if it's cats or dogs or things like that. They also have you actually have to apply for it, but they have adjustments for puppies for Balanceit. So you can create puppy diets, but you do need veterinary approval in order to do that. For human supplements, for using Balanceit, there's a toggle. So when you create the recipe, down by where the Balanceit supplement will be, like it'll say like 2.5 teaspoons or, a fourth of a teaspoon or whatever, depending on the size of your dog. There's going to be two little arrows. If you click that, it's going to change it to human supplements, and then it's going to tell you how much of different human supplements to add. And depending on the recipe, you may need a lot of different human supplements to balance that out, or you might need just a couple. So I know that Ranger's recipe right now, the only thing I really have to add in is a supplement for iodine and then calcium. And for calcium, I just get the now calcium carbonate, like a powder, and then you just add it in. So it depends on the recipe though. With Ash, I use the Balanceit supplement because of his reduced fat content that he needs. It's harder to get everything with, I'd have to use a lot more supplements for him because of his medical problems. So, but calcium, it's just, for me, I use calcium carbonate. You can use bone meal, but it is more complicated than pure calcium carbonate. Let's put it that way. So it's a little bit harder to formulate for.
We're talking about these add-ons and all that. One of the things that triggered in my mind just now is like, I've heard this and people have asked this question, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this, is let's talk about eggs. Some people feel like, some people say, let's give them raw eggs. And some people are like pathogens and all that we're talking about. They're a little concerned and they're like, oh no, you can't do raw eggs or they have to be cooked. So let's start there first about eggs. What's your thoughts there?
So with eggs, I actually have kind of a wishy-washy response on it. I'm actually not as concerned about pathogens in raw eggs as that it contains certain things that inhibit the uptake of certain B vitamins. So the egg white contains, I'd have to look up the exact enzyme, but there's an enzyme and basically it inhibits the uptake of B vitamins. And B vitamins are water soluble, meaning that they need to be given on a frequent basis every day in order to meet your dog's needs. They're not stored vitamins, so things like vitamin A can be stored for later use. B vitamins can't be. So for me, when I look at eggs, I would rather just like have an over easy egg just personally than a raw egg. Now, if you did have a raw recipe, like say you did a raw diet, and this is theoretical because I don't formulate raw, but if you did a raw diet and you wanted to add in like egg or say like raw fish, which also has that same kind of B vitamin issue, you would need to offset the amount that the enzyme is going to break down by adding in more B vitamins, if that makes sense. So you're going to have to offset the breakdown of those B vitamins by putting in excess so that you're still going to meet minimum needs for your dog of B vitamins in that day, while also adding in, say, the egg or the fish that would potentially inhibit that B vitamin uptake. You can see the similar thing with high fiber diets. So if you go above a certain amount of fiber, it starts to inhibit the uptake of certain minerals. So they will adjust those minerals much higher to offset the digestibility of those minerals because they're going to be basically taken up, if you want to say, or gobbled up by the fiber, if we're going to make it like less scientific.
I think this is also important for everybody to understand because we're talking about all these minerals, vitamins, and the vegetables that we're adding to our animals' foods, and we're talking about all these different ingredients. And these are a lot of things that we've talked in Food for Thought as well, is like a lot of these different kibble that you buy at the stores, they will go ahead and they'll cook and they'll extrude the kibble and by the time it gets done, it loses most of its nutritional value, and they're always adding these additional minerals and vitamins and nutritional factors, and sometimes they even add synthetics to it, which is a little alarming to me, just to be able to meet the qualifications for it to get on the shelf. Going back to egg real quick, one of my other questions for eggs. With eggs, I've heard that people actually use the egg shell and grind it up for, the calcium. Have you ever done anything like that, or have you heard that?
So I haven't personally done it because from what I understand, you don't just grind it up. You used to grind it up and bake it, which I don't know. One more thing to bake in my oven doesn't seem like fun. But for eggshells in particular, I know that you can buy eggshell powder. So instead of how I was saying I buy the calcium carbonate powder, you can also buy bone meal, then you can buy eggshell calcium powder too. So you do have a couple different options, but again, with bone meal powder, it is going to be more complicated. So there's other minerals in there other than just calcium. Same thing with the eggshell powder. There's other things in there other than just calcium. So it's a little bit more complicated to balance it, and the Balanceit program does not actually support those things. So when I say Balanceit is a really great beginner tool, I don't have a master's in nutrition. I just have a special interest in it, and I like to home cook for my dogs. I would like to eventually pursue my master's in animal nutrition in the future, but until I have that, I feel or at least get more information, I definitely wouldn't feel comfortable changing out those supplements because I know that they're significantly different. So I wouldn't just, instead of the calcium carbonate, put in something else. I'd always stick with what the Balanceit program told me until I have more info, or if I worked with a boarded nutritionist to tell me what to do.
Nikki, I have to say this. It's I think you are so fascinating in all your discoveries and all your work that you've done in cooking for food for your dogs and all that, and making them homemade. And I think your knowledge base is so incredible about just all these different areas. And I just want to acknowledge that I appreciate you being here today. Angie was flashing her mic a couple of times about the eggs, and I wanted to touch to Angie real quick, and I want to get to Ariel real quick before we close at 10:56, I'll say, 10:56. Angie, did you have anything you wanted to add about the eggs?
Not particularly. I don't actually cook my eggshells, but then again, my primary source of calcium does not come from my eggshells. It's just one extra thing that I put in there. So I try to put bone, so all my food goes through the grinder, but I just put the actual bones through the grinder. You need a pretty heavy duty grinder to be able to do that, and it only works with bones like chicken bones, basically light bird type bones. And I do a couple other things. So I will supplement, I will actually put yogurt in my diet too. And again, that's not my primary source of calcium. I usually look at my bone as my primary source of calcium, but it does give them basically calcium lactate instead of calcium carbonate, which, it's debatable how bioavailable that is, but it's kind of one of those things, either they get it or they don't. But I try to keep my bone calcium levels pretty much slightly over 1-to-1 if you're looking at your calcium phosphorus ratios, but I make sure that my total calcium does not exceed 2-to-1. So either way, they're within the window.
Angie, getting back to you, and then we'll throw this to Nikki as well, is chicken bones. You mentioned chicken bones. You mentioned bones, and a lot of people, I've heard back and forth about chicken bones. You're grinding them up, which I think is one of the ways that can avoid the dangers of chicken bones. But some people have talked about they just give their dogs chicken wings. What's your thought on that?
If they're just giving their dogs chicken wings, that wouldn't be a balanced diet by any means. Just chicken wings wouldn't be a balanced diet.
Well, I think they're kind of using them as treats, something like that. But my big concern is the bones themselves. You hear people saying, oh, they can choke on them. What's your thought on that?
It's not without risk. I really don't like the idea of the tiny chicken wing bones. But the general rule is that they should not be cooked. Never, ever feed your dog cooked chicken bones, because it changes the composition of the bone, and that's when you get ginger splintering and stuff like that. My concern with the chicken wing bones is that their general size would be too small that they could swallow them all in one gulp without chewing them. But I'm sure Nikki has some opinions on that.
Yes, Nikki?
Yeah, for me, and this is, again, probably one of the reasons why I do home cook rather than do raw, is bones do actually make me really nervous. just because I've had bad experiences with them in clinic. And I think that, and this is kind of something that I always say, like, your experiences define you. I don't think I would have moved towards like home cooked food if it wasn't for Ash. And for me, I've unfortunately been part of a couple of surgeries where we had to do very complicated things in order to remove bones that didn't get stuck actually where you'd expect. They got stuck in the pelvic canal. So they had to actually be referred to a specialist to get them removed in one case. So for me, I'm not a huge fan of bones, especially cooked bones. But it's obviously some dogs will get bones, like the raw bones and cooked bones even, on a regular basis and do totally fine and never have any problems. But as a just general practitioner who's had that experience with them, I wouldn't personally feed them to my dogs. It would make me too nervous. If I was ever going to go towards raw, I would definitely be grinding the bones so that they were small enough to pass. I wouldn't trust my dogs to do it themselves. And I don't know if that's mean to not trust my dogs, but it's just, like I said, my experiences will define how I approach these things. And unfortunately, I've had bad experiences. So I wouldn't do it for myself, but I know a lot of people do. And as long as they're cognizant of like that they need to watch their dogs, that something might happen, that, you know, to know what clinical signs to look to, I think, you know, if they want to go ahead and do that, that's definitely their choice to pursue that, especially if their dog enjoys it or they find benefits from it.
I think you're spot on with your experience. Our experiences define our life. That's how we navigate through life and then we expand through life. So in closing, I want to say thank you so much, Nikki, for being here today. And I'm so happy that you're here. And everyone in the room, if you're not following Nikki and you're not following her Instagram, check out her Instagram. She's got these incredible meals on there and that she's cooked and all that. And it's like, I just look at the pictures because she presents them so beautifully. It's so beautiful. I'm Michael today, and Angie, thank you for coming up and sharing your knowledge as well. Everyone in the room, thank you for holding the space today. I will see you guys soon. Nikki, have a beautiful day with your family, your kids, your dogs, and Angie, you as well, and everybody else, wherever you are in the world. Have a beautiful day, afternoon, evening, and we will see you guys soon. We're jumping into our next room here in a second, and we're talking about getting your pet ready for the summer and travel and how to have safe travels with your pets. So we're back on the road again with our pets. Thank you, everybody, and have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.